On the frozen railroad tracks, a mother dog sat, chained tightly, unable to move. Her 3 tiny puppies huddled close to her, shivering from the cold and fear. The ground began to tremble. The sound of the approaching train grew louder. The mother dog pulled at the chains, trying to free herself, but it was useless. Her tired body was covered in dirt and scars, proof of the suffering she had endured. She turned to her puppies, licking each one gently, as if saying goodbye. Just then, Daniel Carter, a wildlife photographer, happened to be nearby, capturing the morning sunrise. Through his camera lens, he spotted something unusual on the tracks. His heart skipped a beat when he realized what was happening. A dog? Chained to the tracks, he whispered in shock. Without wasting a second, he ran. His boots slipped on the icy ground, but he didn't stop. The train's horn blasted, echoing through the silent forest. It was getting closer. Daniel reached the helpless dog and dropped to his knees. The mother dog looked up at him, her eyes full of desperation but also trust. He saw the thick, rusty chains wrapped around her neck and body. His hands shook as he pulled out his multi-tool. "Hold on, girl," he said, struggling to unlock the metal clasp. The chains were old and stubborn. His fingers were numb from the cold, making it even harder. The train was seconds away, the tracks vibrating under his knees. Come on," he muttered, his breath visible in the freezing air. The mother dog suddenly stretched her neck forward, allowing him better access to the chains. She wasn't fighting him, she was helping him. Finally, with a loud click, the lock broke. The heavy chains fell to the ground. The mother dog didn't hesitate. She snatched one puppy in her mouth, and Daniel grabbed the other 2, holding them close to his chest. "Run," he shouted. Together, they jumped off the tracks and tumbled down the snowy embankment just as the train thundered past. The force of it knocked Daniel backward, but he held on to the puppies tightly. The sound was deafening, metal screeching against metal, before finally fading into the distance. For a moment, everything was silent again. Daniel sat up, his heart pounding. The puppies wiggled in his arms, unharmed but scared. A few feet away, the mother dog stood up, her legs trembling. She placed the puppy down and then turned to look at Daniel. Their eyes met. Daniel expected her to run, but she didn't. Instead, she walked toward him, nudged his arm, and then checked on her puppies. It was as if she was thanking him. Daniel exhaled a shaky breath. Whatever had happened to this dog, it wasn't over yet. Someone had done this to her. And now, he needed to find out who, and why. Daniel sat in the snow, still catching his breath. The mother dog stood nearby, licking her 3 puppies and making sure they were safe. She was free now, but something about her scarred body and tired eyes told him that this was not just an accident. As he got closer, he noticed marks on her fur, deep cuts and old wounds. Some were fresh, others had healed long ago. This poor dog had suffered for a long time. Then, he saw something strange. On her left ear, there was a tattooed mark. Daniel frowned. He had seen something like this before. It was the kind of mark used by illegal dogfighting rings. His heart sank. Someone had chained this dog to the tracks on purpose. They didn't want her anymore. The mother dog whimpered and started walking toward the trees. She moved slowly, her body still weak, but her steps were determined. It was as if she wanted Daniel to follow her. Curious and concerned, Daniel picked up his camera and followed. The puppies, still too small to walk far, stayed close to their mother, struggling to keep up. They walked through the cold, silent forest, the ground covered in snow. After a few minutes, the dog suddenly stopped in front of an old, abandoned hunting cabin. The wooden walls were falling apart, and the door was slightly open. Daniel's stomach twisted. He had a bad feeling about this. He stepped inside and immediately covered his nose. The smell was awful. Like rotting meat and dirty animals. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. There were rusty cages stacked against the wall, bloodstains on the floor, and old chains hanging from the ceiling. In the corner, there were empty bowls and chewed-up leashes. This wasn't just a hunting cabin. This was a place where dogs had been kept, fought, tortured. Daniel felt sick. He looked back at the mother dog. She stood near the door, her body tense, her ears pinned back. This place held terrible memories for her. Had she been trapped here? Had she watched other dogs suffer? Daniel clenched his fists. Someone had done this. And they had left her to die on the tracks. He pulled out his phone and quickly dialed Sheriff Laura Bennett. "Sheriff, it's Daniel Carter," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "I think I just found something big. A mother dog was chained to the railroad tracks, and now I found an old cabin, with cages, blood, and signs of illegal dogfighting." There was silence on the other end, then Sheriff Bennett's serious voice. "Stay right there. I'm on my way." Daniel hung up and took more photos of the scene, making sure to capture everything. He turned to the mother dog and her puppies. "Don't worry," he whispered. "No one is ever going to hurt you again." Daniel stood outside the abandoned cabin, the mother dog and her puppies close by. He could hear the distant sound of sirens getting louder. Sheriff Laura Bennett and her team were on their way. The mother dog sat beside him, her ears perked up. She seemed to sense something big was about to happen. Her puppies huddled close, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the tension in the air. Within minutes, Sheriff Bennett's police truck pulled up, followed by 2 more vehicles. She stepped out, her eyes scanning the scene. Her face hardened when she saw the cages, the bloodstains, and the chains inside the cabin. "This was a dogfighting ring," she muttered. "And that poor girl." She glanced at the mother dog, she was probably used as a bait dog. Daniel clenched his fists. He had read about bait dogs before. These were weaker dogs used for training aggressive fighting dogs. They were tied up, attacked, and left to suffer. His stomach twisted at the thought. As the officers started gathering evidence, a truck's engine roared in the distance. Daniel and the sheriff turned toward the road just as a black pickup truck pulled up fast, kicking up snow and dirt. The doors swung open, and 3 men stepped out, their leader, Jake Turner, looking furious. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew that name. Jake had a history of illegal hunting and animal cruelty. Jake's eyes darted between the cabin and the police officers. He realized too late that they had found his secret. "You got no right to be here." Jake spat, taking a step forward. Sheriff Bennett didn't flinch. "We have every right. This is an active crime scene." Jake cursed under his breath, his hands curling into fists. His men tensed up, ready for a fight. One of them reached behind his back, and Daniel's heart stopped. He was reaching for a weapon. Before Daniel could react, a deep, fierce growl echoed through the air. The mother dog stepped forward, her body low and tense, baring her sharp teeth. Jake and his men froze. For the first time, Daniel saw true fear in their eyes. The mother dog wasn't running. She was standing her ground, protecting the man who had saved her. "Put your hands where I can see them," Sheriff Bennett ordered, her gun drawn. One of Jake's men hesitated, but before he could act, the mother dog lunged forward, barking ferociously. That was all the distraction the officers needed. In seconds, they tackled Jake and his men to the ground. Handcuffs clicked, and Sheriff Bennett pressed Jake's face into the snow. "You're done," she said coldly. "Dogfighting. Animal abuse. Illegal gambling. You're going away for a long time." As the officers loaded the criminals into the police trucks, Daniel turned to the mother dog, who was now watching calmly. "You saved me back there," he whispered. The mother dog wagged her tail for the first time. She wasn't scared anymore. She knew she was finally safe. The nightmare was over. Jake Turner and his men were arrested, and the illegal dogfighting ring was shut down. But for Grace, the mother dog, and her 3 puppies, the journey to healing had just begun. Daniel watched as the animal rescue team carefully placed Grace and her puppies into a van. She didn't fight them, but her body was tense. She had spent so much time suffering that she didn't know if she could trust humans again. "She needs time," one of the rescue workers told Daniel. "Dogs like her have seen the worst of people. It takes a while to believe in kindness again." Daniel nodded, but something inside him told him that Grace's story wasn't over yet. The wildlife sanctuary was a quiet, peaceful place in the mountains. It was home to rescued animals, injured deer, abandoned foxes, and dogs saved from bad situations. This would be the safest place for Grace and her puppies to heal. As soon as they arrived, the puppies were given warm blankets, soft beds, and plenty of food. They were nervous at first, but soon they were playing and wagging their tails. Puppies heal fast. They don't hold on to pain the way adult dogs do. But Grace was different. She stayed in the corner of her enclosure, watching everyone carefully. She didn't growl, but she didn't come close either. Daniel visited her every day, sitting quietly near her without trying to force her to interact. He would bring fresh food and talk to her softly. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Grace," he whispered. "No one will hurt you again." For the first few days, Grace ignored him. But then, something changed. One morning, Daniel was placing a bowl of fresh chicken in front of her when he felt a gentle nudge against his hand. He looked down. Grace was sniffing his fingers. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Over the next few weeks, the puppies grew stronger and more playful. Their little tails wagged whenever they saw Daniel, and they loved playing with the sanctuary staff. One by one, they found loving homes. The first puppy, a small brown one, went to a young girl who had lost her dog the year before. She named him Buddy, and from the moment she picked him up, he licked her face and wagged his tail like he had always been hers. The second puppy, a black and white one, was adopted by an elderly couple who wanted a companion. They named her Maggie. The last puppy, a golden-colored one, was taken in by a firefighter who wanted a dog to train for rescue work. He named him Chief. Daniel felt happy for them, but there was one dog left, Grace. Unlike her puppies, Grace still hadn't let anyone touch her. She allowed Daniel to sit near her, but she never wagged her tail or came forward on her own. One evening, Daniel sat outside her enclosure, watching the sunset. "You're free now, Grace," he said softly. "You don't have to stay here if you don't want to." Grace tilted her head, as if thinking about his words. Daniel knew the sanctuary was not a forever home for her. The plan was to release her back into the wild once she fully recovered. But something inside him didn't want to let her go. The next morning, he left the enclosure door open. If Grace wanted to leave, she could. She stepped toward the exit, pausing to look outside. She could see the forest, the open fields, the freedom waiting for her. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had prepared himself to say goodbye. But then, something unexpected happened. Grace turned around. Instead of walking away, she walked toward Daniel and sat beside him. Daniel held his breath. Then, for the first time, Grace rested her head on his knee. It was the moment he had been waiting for. She had made her choice. From that day on, Grace became part of Daniel's life. She followed him around the sanctuary, watching him work. She still didn't like strangers much, but she trusted Daniel. One day, Sheriff Bennett visited the sanctuary with good news. "Your evidence helped us shut down the entire dogfighting operation," she told him. Because of you, we were able to save dozens of other dogs. Daniel looked at Grace, her golden brown eyes calm for the first time. You hear that, girl? He said, scratching behind her ear. You didn't just save yourself. You helped save others too. Grace let out a soft huff, closing her eyes. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finding a home, finding safety, and learning to trust again. As Daniel watched her lying beside him, he knew one thing for sure: Grace wasn't going anywhere.